Thank you so much for attending this new webinar. I really appreciate y'all tuning in. It's a little bit of a light crowd tonight. I guess not that many people want to learn about growing mushrooms at home. It was a kind of an interesting thing to me, so sometimes I use these topics as a way of learning a little bit more about something that is interesting that I want to learn about. And this one proved to be really interesting. I was actually pretty pleased with all the interesting information that I came up with, and might even mushroom out into another webinar in the series, but that one will be a little bit in the future. As always, if you have questions that pop up during the course of the webinar, please go ahead and put those in the chat box and I'll get to them at the end. Also, if you are so inclined and you would like to put your town and state in the chat box so I can kind of keep track of where everybody is from, I would appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming here. So let's go ahead and get started. So, what are mushrooms? Well, everybody sees them out in your yard. A lot of times they'll pop up. Sometimes we call them fairy rings around areas where you maybe had an old tree that's decomposed, and now you see some mushrooms that are kind of popping up. We always see them in the stores. You see the little white button mushrooms and the portobellos, those kinds of things. And maybe if you're in like a Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or something, you might see some fancier mushrooms that are there. But there's a whole world out there of different types of mushrooms that are available to us, as just the general public to grow ourselves. I have always wanted to kind of jump into that, but I've been kind of hesitant, because I don't know. I have cats and sometimes they end up on the counter and I didn't want them getting into that. But this actually kind of made me think that this is actually a lot easier to do than I thought. But basically, mushrooms are part of the fungi family or fungi, however you want to say it, which is a distinct kingdom of organisms. That's going to be your mushrooms, your molds, and your yeasts. They're heterotrophs, meaning unlike we're typically thinking of plants, they can't make their own food. So what they do is they secrete these enzymes that kind of break down organic matter. We kind of think of them as decomposers. So when you compost a lot, you'll probably be pretty familiar. I'm sure you've seen slime molds. You've probably had little mushrooms pop up in there as it grows into the wood chips, and breaks down the cellulose. And that's basically what they're doing. They're feeding themselves. They're breaking that down and using that. Some of them might be symbiotes. Those are meaning that they kind of just live in harmony with whatever it is. Mycorrhiza is probably one. They actually help plant roots. They kind of act as an extension of some plant roots. And so sometimes we pay more money so we can get soil inoculated with that. So that can be very favorable to gardeners. And sometimes they can be pathogens. I am a certified arborist. And so I get a lot of diagnostics that come into the office, and some of those are these large conch fruiting bodies of the fungi that grow a lot of times on oaks, but sometimes other trees. And what they do is they'll find a little in, maybe there's a nick from a string trimmer where the lawnmower ran into it, and they get in there and then they start decomposing that live cambium area and growing into the heartwood of the tree. That's actually bad. That's called a pathogenic response, and how they're feeding on that live tree, and that's not good. So they do some of that. There aren't very many of them that way, but yes, there are some out there that are not good. So many of these mushrooms are edible, and you can find them in a ton of different culinary dishes. The good old US and American cooking doesn't use a lot of them. You'll find them more in like Asian type cuisines and things like that, but we're seeing them more and more as enthusiasts kind of get into it and make their own, grow their own in their own house. So the good news is that yes, a lot of these really awesome mushroom species can be easily grown at home, and it's really not that difficult. It sounds a little intimidating, but it's really not that hard. And once you get the setup for it, and they make it as easy as possible, in a couple months you can be harvesting your own mushrooms. So why grow them? Well, they actually are rich in nutrients. They have a lot of B vitamins. They're very low in calories. How many of us have tried to lose some weight? We learned that portobello mushrooms actually make a pretty decent substitute for meat. That's called the umami response, and that means that it's a very meaty texture. It's kind of used often as a substitute for meat. So I actually had a uh, portobello Italian kind of sub sandwich. And if somebody had not told me that those were portobellos, I ordered it, so I knew, but I wouldn't have maybe noticed. I mean, it's a little different, of course, but it still tasted really good. They've got some bioactive compounds in there, so that can be possibly good for your health and protect against some chronic illnesses. There's medicinal properties. I mean, people have used them for over 1,000 years in various ways throughout history in all sorts of different cultures. And supposedly, if you've ever seen the ads for the mushroom coffee, it's supposed to give you some additional mental focus and creativity. Also, environmentally wise, they're very sustainable. You can grow a whole lot of mushrooms in a very small space. They don't take up much water or energy, and they grow in the dark. A lot of them do. So, pretty easy, right? You could probably grow them in your basement or your closet. They have bioremediation potential. So sometimes certain particular species of fungi might help break down oils, like from oil spills, maybe some heavy metals. There are some documented cases of that. So that's good. And waste reduction. So they can be grown on agricultural byproducts, coffee grounds, cardboard, things like that. So instead of just composting that kind of stuff or recycling that kind of stuff, you can actually put the mushrooms and grow some mushrooms off of them. So why, again, culinary versatility? I mentioned the umami flavor. They're going to add that depth and savoriness to dishes, and they have flavors. Sometimes people will say, well, what does it taste like? Specifically like snake. Oh, it tastes like chicken. Everything tastes like chicken. Well, some of these do taste like chicken, but it's a plant product, so maybe a little healthier for you. Certainly a little easier. You don't have to worry if you're a vegetarian, you can eat them without worrying too much. There's a wide variety. You can get all sorts of different varieties of mushrooms that you can grow in your own house. It doesn't even matter if you're in a condo or an apartment or a tiny little house or a really big house. You can grow them anywhere. And as I mentioned, they are used in tons of dishes from around the world. They also supposedly can have some prebiotic or probiotic effects, and they may have some antiviral properties, which would be really good for the cold and flu season, right? So let's dive in and look at mushroom anatomy a little bit. I'm not going to get too in depth, but I do want everybody, if you tune into these, I try to teach you some good stuff, and you have to really kind of know how they work in order to fully appreciate, I think, how good mushrooms can be. So just here's a little diagram of what a mushroom looks like. So you've got the mycelium, that's the root-like network that they grow. The mycelium it can, and you'll see pictures of it. And we'll talk more in depth, but that's the mycelium, your root-like network. Your hyphae, that's going to be the little thread-like filaments on the ends of that, the individual parts that make up that mycelium. The annulus, that's the circular band of tissue. That's just going to be there from the earlier stages as it's emerging. You got the cap, and that's going to be for like the button type mushrooms or the pileus, and that's going to protect that spore producing surface underneath. You've got scales. Those are going to be those very small tissue patches. Not all of them have it. This one certainly is very obvious, but some of them may not be as obvious. And that's going to be the remnants of that protective veil as it grew up and was growing older. You have the reproductive spores, the most important part, because that's the reproductive structures of the mushroom. And then you've got the gills. Those are those very thin blade-like structures underneath the cap, and that's going to basically be where those spores are produced and released. And then you've got the stem. I like the stems personally. It's going to support the stalk and it will lift the cap above the ground. And the vulva, that's the base of the mushroom. And that was kind of left behind after the protective part popped up. And that's the part that you see there. All right, mushroom life cycle. Nothing too complex. So you're going to have your spore release. A mature, fully mature mushroom would then release up to billions of these tiny little spores from the gills or those blade-like structures. And then those are going to be carried away in the water, in the wind, by animals, that kind of thing, to new locations. Then you've got the spore germination. So if that spore lands in the right spot where it has good organic matter, perfect temperature, moisture, all of that stuff, that hyphae, or those little bitty things in the mycelial network, those are going to grow together to form that full mycelial network. So that would be the next stage. When you have a lot of them, they kind of come together. And then the primordia formation. So after everything grows and you've got that mycelium network there, when you start to see those tiny little pinheads, that means that's the fruiting body of that shroom. And so that's the part that pokes above the ground, and then it grows up and it will form the mature mushroom, which is the fruiting body, thus completing the life cycle. So, as I said, not too difficult to understand. This is a pretty good facsimile of that. So now you kind of know how a mushroom reproduces. All right, so let's move into cultivation. So there's two ways of doing it. You could do commercial. That's done on a very, very large scale. So commercial growers, so those folks that are making all those mushrooms that you could buy in the store, I personally like going when Kroger marks down the little button mushrooms, and I'll buy a couple of them. They're good in a pot roast or maybe a chicken marsala or something like that, but they're really inexpensive, honestly. And they do add a lot of volume to some dishes and a depth of flavor. But so they're going to grow them like you see here. So you're either going to have shelves stacked high. These are button mushrooms that you see this person picking right there. Or it looks like you've got some oyster mushrooms that are growing in the top picture. They're going to hang them from bags. A lot of times these are done in cargo containers, refrigerated cargo containers. You can stack a lot of them in a very small area, and you can grow a lot of these fungi on these bags and harvest them in a very small area. So this is considered agriculture, just like anything else where you're growing it, but it can be done in a very small footprint. Now, as part of this particular webinar, I was also looking at maybe doing a field trip for our master gardeners later on. So I started looking to see where I could find a mushroom farm. And there's actually a lot of them in Atlanta, surprisingly, which has a higher density population. But because you can do it in such a small footprint, it's very economical. So who knew, right? But commercial farms are also going to have the different parts of how mushrooms are grown. So they'll have a spawn lab. That's some place where they're harvesting the spores and they're putting them together, and you'll learn more about how that's done. And then the inoculating, they've got automated harvesting. So you see this person here, but they may not do that. They may actually have robots or something that comes in and harvests for them, and packaging systems so that they can quickly cycle through. And if mushrooms are grown in the correct environmental conditions, you can get a lot of them. The problem usually lies if we try to grow them outside. Here in the Atlanta area, we have a very narrow window when they would grow because they do prefer cooler temperatures. Next up, and the one that we're going to talk about is the home cultivation. So that's where most of this is going to lie. If you want to check out the mushroom cultivation for beginners, this is a blog. I thought it was actually very good. It was very well written, and it gave step by step how you would go about inoculating and or growing your own mushrooms. The nice thing is, even if you're really not that adept at doing that kind of thing, you can buy the whole kit and it's already done for you. And all you have to do is basically just expose it to air and it will, expose it to air, get it moist, and it will grow mushrooms for you on your kitchen countertop, which, hey, you can't beat that. So it doesn't require a lot of space, like I mentioned, and you can grow a lot of popular varieties like oyster mushrooms, shiitake, lion's mane, which is one that you can actually collect outside if you know where to look, and button mushrooms. They all grow very easily. And I'm going to go over a bunch of different species of mushrooms, and I'll actually grade them by how easy or kind of a medium hard or very hard, and you'll see which ones are the easiest to grow and which ones really require more of an expert knowledge base and or if you just want to experiment and see what you can get out of it. So you can see here that there are different mediums. So in the top medium, you have kind of an inoculum. A lot of times that's going to be just a grain that they inoculate. It's a sterile grain. They come in and they inoculate it with the spores, and then it grows just like you see here. You can also do it in straw. Somebody went and got a laundry basket and they're growing it probably with a mixture of straw and compost. And then down at the bottom, you have a log and they've inoculated that log and then you have mushrooms growing out of it. So you're going to need straw, sawdust, manure, logs, that kind of stuff. Tools, a little spray bottle or a mister, something like that for humidity. Thermometer, because you want to make sure that that temperature stays in that range of whatever mushroom you're trying to grow. You're going to need clear plastic bags or humidity tents, and I'll show you what one of those looks like. You can get them on Amazon. They're not horribly expensive. And then, of course, the mushroom spawn or the spores. You can buy those. There's a lot of mushroom stores on the internet. You can go to Etsy. You can buy the inoculum there. You can even get it on Amazon. You can get it anywhere. I was very surprised at how easily it was to find sources for this. So most mushrooms are going to thrive anywhere from 55 to 75 degrees with about 80 to 95% humidity. So here in Georgia, in Gwinnett County, we don't see that 55 to 75 except for the spring and the fall. Otherwise, it's just not really that great of condition. They don't like the high heat and they don't like the really cold. So we only have very narrow windows when we could expect to see and harvest some. If you're willing to have the conditions in your house, maybe a grow tent or something like that, you could expect many, many more for a much longer time period if you're willing to do that. Most like oyster mushrooms, those are going to fruit in like 3 to 4 weeks. That's really not that long, but shiitakes can take a lot longer. So make sure that you do a little reading on whatever variety you're looking at because it could take a lot longer. But the thing is, you can also stagger. So you can do some successional planting like you would in your garden, and you could have multiples growing at different stages. That way you can harvest them, but you have some more that are coming along shortly. And as long as they're in a nice climate controlled environment, you can expect ongoing harvests for quite a while. So cultivation terms. So kind of let's familiarize ourselves about these. So the spawn, that's the starter culture of the mushroom mycelial growth. And they're going to use an inoculated, they call it the spawn, but it's really like a sterile grain or something like that, or some other type of carrier that those spores, that mycelial network that started is growing on. And that is actually used to inoculate whatever substrate. So you're going to get that in a bag. You might also get it mixed into a liquid medium. So you might get it in a syringe. There are different ways of getting it, and it really depends on what type of mushroom and how adept you are with what it is. Some of these are really easy to grow, some are not, and some respond better in certain ways, like having a carrier, like a sterile grain versus a liquid. The substrate, that's going to be the material they're going to grow on. So that's going to be your sawdust, that's going to be your straw, your coffee grounds, your that kind of stuff. And so that's going to provide food for that mycelial network to break down. So that's the decomposing part. So think of it as a gargantuan compost pile, but a sterile one, because it has to be sterile. If it's not, you can get all sorts of other stuff that grows in there, bacteria, other types of mold and fungi. You don't want any of that. So it's got to be sterile. You can't go out to your compost bin and pick stuff up without sterilizing it first. Very important. The plug spawn, that's going to be the substrate that is going to inoculate tree logs. So you may get these little plugs, and you'll see some pictures, I'll point it out. Or you can just get the bag of spawn that may be a sawdust, and you just jam it into a hole that you drilled into a log. Either way. The inoculation, that's the process that you're going through as you're adding that spawn to the substrate. So maybe you're mixing it into the straw or the sawdust, or maybe you're plugging it into that log, that kind of thing. Colonization, that's when that mycelial network spreads throughout the substrate, making it ready to fruit. So that is the process in a compost heap where it starts growing out through. So if you went and shoveled some, let's say you had a load of wood chips delivered and you let it sit there for far too long, and then you finally went out to go dig some of it up, and you've got all these little white network fungal looking things growing through it, that's a mycelial network. Okay, so it's already started to colonize. If you let it go any longer, you're going to get those fruiting bodies. Those are called pins. That's the beginning stage when they're really, really tiny before they get big enough to actually do something with. And then the flush, that's going to be when you get a cluster of these little pins. So when you have several groups of those, they'll start to grow, and then eventually they'll become the harvestable size. So different ways to grow them at home. All right. This is probably the easiest way that a beginner can jump in. There are lots of different kits, lots of different species, and you could get 3 or 4 different species. You could get some golden oyster mushrooms. You could get some blue ones. You could get some creminies. Um, you know, anything. There's tons of them out there. And they just come basically in a little kit like this. Everything is in there. All the materials are in there. It's already sterilized. It's already had the inoculum added. You can grow it on your kitchen countertop. Everything is ready to go. All you have to do is just cut an X to open it up, wet it down, make sure you're keeping it nice and moist. And within about 2 weeks, because most people's houses are right at about that 68 to 75 degrees that mushrooms like to grow in, they'll start to grow. So as long as you keep your moisture level at what you need it to be at, you're going to get mushrooms. Very easy. So easy. The pros of this, very easy, very fast. Makes a good gift. Give one to your mother-in-law. Um, they're not terribly expensive, and as long as you're keeping it wet, you're going to get some kind of product out of it. Cons, you're only going to have a very limited harvest. You might get 2 or 3 helpings off of it, and then it's going to kind of expend whatever substances you have in there as that substrate. So it doesn't last a long time because it's a very small kit, but you can buy multiples, and I'll show you another one that you can do that maybe offers a little bit more. All right, so a pre-inoculated grow bag. So this would be the next step up. If you want more volume, these pre-inoculated grow bags are pretty much the same as that grow kit. They're just bigger. So, and they're not as pretty to look at in a nice little cardboard box. So, um, maybe you would put it in like the spare bedroom, I don't know, or the laundry room. But you can get a lot more mushrooms off of this. And so, under the same conditions, you're just going to cut an X in it. You're going to make sure that you keep it moist, keep it in a nice uniform temperature, but you're going to get a higher volume of whatever mushroom you're growing in this. Still has a limited lifespan, but you're going to get a higher volume. So, growing mushrooms in containers. This would be the next logical step. So, if you want to continue to do this, then you're probably going to invest in some other stuff, some of the other equipment that would be necessary. Thankfully, none of it is really expensive, not really hard to come by either. I mean, you can get a 5 gallon bucket, drill some holes in it. You're going to get some wood chips and you're going to learn how to pasteurize them or sterilize them. In this case, you can put it in a mesh bag, boil it for a couple of hours. That's going to kill microorganisms, mold spores and bacteria, things like that. Um, and then you're going to alternate filling with wood chips and straw. And then adding in that commercial mushroom spawn. So you're going to get a bag, which is not the kit. It's a separate bag. It's going to have sawdust or some other carrier in there. It's already been inoculated with that particular species of mushroom. And so you're going to alternate some of that in the layers between the wood chips and the straw. And then you put a lid on it, stick it in a cool place, kind of forget about it for a while. Let it do its thing because that little mycelial network is going to grow all in through there. And then come back, take a peek and see if you see those little pins that are emerging. And then it should, as long as you don't have any contaminants, which that happens. If it smells funky, it's probably contaminated. You might want to get rid of it. If you don't see any of the little white mycelial fuzziness growing on it, on that top layer within a couple weeks, then you probably got some that wasn't fully inoculated. And that happens. So there's, some things that you have to worry about. Those first pins should give or take appear in about 10 days, 2 weeks, with some of the easier varieties of mushrooms that are easy to grow. So the pros on this, space saving, very scalable. I mean, here's in that bottom right picture, you can see those look like 3 gallon or maybe a gallon ice cream containers. But you can very easily just take a corner of a room and you can add all sorts of different species of mushrooms there. You can have a whole bunch of different stuff. But it does require careful humidity and contamination control. We'll talk a little bit about that. Growing mushrooms on logs. So I did take a class a couple years ago, learning from a mycology expert on how do you grow mushrooms on logs. It seems intuitive and easy, but there's more to it. So you can't just go out in your backyard and get a dead log from the tree that fell down last spring. You're actually going to harvest a live tree because you want something that's living. So you get this method. You're going to cut it into sections that are more manageable. So something that's probably a couple feet long, that kind of thing. You're going to take and very specific species too. So like oaks and elms and maples and birches. You're going to drill holes that are about 1.5 inches deep, about an inch, 3/4 of an inch to an inch wide. Because remember, you're going to shove that inoculum down in there and about 6 inches apart. So just like that guy in the top left's doing, you're just going to do that all over the log. And then you're gonna take a plug and you're gonna jam that commercial plug spawn of that particular species of mushroom down into that hole. And once you've got it crammed all the way in there, you're going to seal it with a melted food grade wax or beeswax if you have that. Maybe you have bees. And then you're going to lean that log on like if you have a concrete area, if you have a shady area out in your backyard, or maybe you've got an area under a deck or something like that. You don't want it necessarily laying on the soil, but you can definitely lean it on a concrete area against a structure or a shady, moist area. Sometimes people will, like out at UGA, they had misters that were set up to mist it every so often. So that kept it nice and moist in a shady area. And they had a big, long concrete area, and these logs just kind of leaned up against each other. They got a lot of harvests off of these. So you're going to mist it to keep it nice and moist. It'll take 6 to 7 months. So it could take a full cycle though. The log that I had, it took a year and took a year and a half, but then I didn't necessarily keep it moist. That mycelium will grow in there, it will grow all through the wood and start breaking that down. And then you'll start to see those pins pop up. And it kind of surprised me because I didn't think anything was going to happen. But one time I walked past and boom, there were a whole bunch of shiitake mushrooms growing out of it. Who would have known? So the pros on this, very low maintenance. You don't do a whole lot other than keeping it wet once you set it up. It can fruit for years. So if you're talking a big log like what he's got there, or even longer ones, years. You can get multiple years of harvest off of it, as long as the temperatures are in the appropriate range. But it can take months or even a year for your first harvest. So, pros and cons. All right, garden beds. So this could be in ground, this could be in a basket like this. It needs an outdoor shady area, maybe an area under a tree that nothing else will grow. Well, this would be a good place to use that. So the good ones for this would be like wine caps, shiitakes, oyster mushrooms, lion's manes, and chicken of the woods, and morels. Morels are really hard to grow indoors. So if you want to try these, you can try them outside. So in the spring, you're going to choose an area, cover it with cardboard to kind of block the soil, add about 2 inches of wood chips and some straw. So you're doing some lasagna layer in there with your stuff, and you're going to inoculate it just like you would have done in a bucket, except you're doing it on a bigger scale outside. Um, Keep it moist. Very important to do that. And you should, assuming everything is done correctly, maybe be able to harvest them in the fall when we hit that nice cool period, kind of like where we are now. So pros, you can integrate this with vegetable gardens. And if you exhaust that, and you don't want to do it anymore, hey, it's a new place where you can grow some more stuff because you've got all that compost material there. But it is very seasonal and weather dependent because when it gets warm, you're not going to get much growth. Straw bales. So use straw, not hay, and you're going to run a hose over that bale and soak it in water, or put it into a tub, or kiddie pool or something like that to soak it. You want it to really suck up all of that moisture. And then you're going to make some pockets in that straw as deep as possible in there. And then you're going to take that inoculum that you would have used for the bucket or the bed or whatever, and you're going to put that in there. That's You got to keep that straw bale moist. Same thing as if you were growing vegetables in there. It's very important that you keep it moist because those mushrooms need it just like your plants would if you were growing tomatoes in it or whatever. If the temperature's over 80 degrees, don't put it in the sunlight. You want to keep it in a nice shady location in direct light. You're probably not going to get much growth. So same thing with the tree. You're not going to get much growth when it's hot. So you just have to be patient. And after a couple of weeks, you'll start noticing that mycelial network. You'll start seeing it like that middle one there where it's kind of white and fuzzy on the outer edges. And that shows you that it's growing. And then you'll see the fruiting bodies, and then they'll grow and they'll be harvestable, just like you see with the golden oyster, and the pearl oyster there. So pros, it's really inexpensive. I mean, it's only the cost of a straw bale. And, you can, maybe if you bought too many extras for a straw bale garden for your tomatoes and stuff, use it for this. You know, it's short-lived. These will break down pretty quickly, but you can definitely use them in the compost bin after if you don't want to, use it for anything else. All right, so growing mushrooms in a compost bed. I had a hard time trying to find pictures. So sorry, you get the recycled pictures of the mushrooms there, but you're still using the straw, so you could technically take that bale and reuse it after you grew the mushrooms in it. Mix it with horse manure, poultry litter, maybe some gypsum, stuff like that, maybe cow manure if you have it. Mix it up really good, and it's going to become a good compost. Now, some people might just take that and go, "Oh, I'm going to put that in my garden." That's good stuff, and that's fine. You can do that too. But you can also turn around and use that as more mushroom substrate. So this is one where if you've already used it, you probably would want to um, sterilize it if you want to make sure that you're not competing with different types of fungi in there. So after it's compost, and it smells that earthy smell that tells you it's good compost, um, you can try mixing it with grain and grain spawn. If you're a lot of commercial operations will use compost, they sterilize it first because they want to make sure that there's nothing else growing in there. And there are some types of fungi that are out there that you wouldn't want to grow in there to eat. So it is important that you do that. But if you do that, button mushrooms, very easy. And oyster mushrooms, again, some of the easiest to grow. You can definitely do that inside now if you have the compost. So, assuming everything is broken down, you can bring it in the house or your garage or something like that. And this is the classic method. This is the way you see, if you think back to a couple slides ago when that woman was in there and she was picking them, that's what they're growing on. They're growing on a compost substrate. But I mentioned contamination can be a problem, moisture control can be a problem. So doing this on a larger scale is probably hard, but nothing saying you can't use your oven to bake and sterilize some of that compost, or even you can use an instant pot or not I don't want to say a crock pot, not a crock pot, pressure cooker. So if you have one of those, you can use those as well. All right, so let's go on to different types of edible mushrooms. So these I'm just going to kind of whiz through. This is more for if you would like a copy of these slides, I am happy to provide it. It gives a lot of information. This is not an exhaustive list. There are all sorts of different oyster mushrooms that are out there. This is golden and blue. You can see they're very pretty. They have a very delicate, nutty kind of cashew-like flavor. Button mushrooms, and this is something that most people aren't going to think about. And this is I didn't know that. I was X years old when I learned that button mushrooms, those little white mushrooms that you buy at the store, are also portobello mushrooms. Did you know that? Now you do. They're just a different stage. So button mushrooms, the little white ones that you purchase, those are the younger variety. And as they go through, it's the same species. As they go through, when they get the next stage, that's the cremini mushrooms. Those are the baby bellas. So when you see the darker ones, a little bit bigger than the buttons, but a darker color, those are going to be called baby bellas or cremini mushrooms. And then finally, when they are fully mature, they're going to be portobellos. And these have that very meaty, umami rich kind of meaty flavor. So they're good for a meat substitute if you chop them up. I've used them as a ground beef type substitute. And if you look at a lot of hamburger substitutes, the ground ones, they're going to have portobellos as an ingredient. So there you go. And then you have the enoki mushrooms. Those are going to be the very long, spindly ones. Somewhat challenging to grow here. So you can see the top four, very easy. The oysters are super easy to grow. The button and the cremini mushrooms are pretty easy to grow, but then the portobellos, you start running into some challenges, and then the enokis are pretty difficult. So you need to probably be more of an expert, I would say, if you're wanting to try to grow those. And chestnut mushrooms. So that top bag those are chestnut mushrooms. And those are firm and meaty, kind of an earthy, nutty flavor. And they are, that's an inoculated bag, so you would grow that. Those are kind of medium hardness. And then you have the wine caps, and you can see these are mushroom kits. So you can buy these, and they come pre-inoculated. All you have to do is do that little X and keep it nice and misted. But they're going to have kind of a earthy, nutty flavor, very firm stems. And you can also grow them outside if you wish as well, just like you can here on your counter. Very easy to grow, not hard at all. Next up, chicken of the woods. This is one that most people, when they're out foraging for mushrooms outside, this is a very, like, you've hit the jackpot if you found the chicken of the woods. It's pretty tasty. Uh, it doesn't do well in an inoculated substrate growing it in the house. This is one that you really are probably going to need a log for. You can see here is a grow kit for chicken of the woods, and they have small branches, small sections of branch. So you don't have wood chips, or you don't have sawdust or straw. You have to have intact cambium, or the sections of the branch and the wood that it can grow into. Very hard, a little harder to grow, and but very dense and meaty. Hey, it's got a chicken-like flavor. There's one that tastes like chicken. Chicken of the woods. And then you have the pearl oyster mushrooms. Again, oyster, fairly easy to grow, very pretty, kind of a shellfish-like flavor. So if you're allergic to shrimp or other shellfish, this might be a good alternative for you. You can saute this up, and you can make it, at least try to think like you're eating shrimp, if you became allergic later in life, and it's not going to affect you. Shiitake, that one's kind of a medium difficulty, but it's got kind of an earthy, smoky flavor. Uh, Not too difficult. I mean, that's kind of an inoculated bag there that it's growing for. Morels, this is the holy grail of mushrooms. So here in Georgia, um, maybe up into the mountains, as far south as kind of where we are here. But when you reach the fall line and down into South Georgia and the coastal plain, the temperatures that morels need, you just don't see as often. Plus, they don't tolerate the hot very well. So you can buy, this is actually a grow out. You can see here, they're growing them in compost. You can actually purchase the morel, the inoculated morel spawn, and you can try growing that outside or in a greenhouse or something like that. Sometimes people will buy that and they'll put it in their wooded area. Um, Chip, if you're touching the phone, it's actually showing up on the screen. So please be careful. Don't do that. Um, so the morels, you can try doing it. They're harder to grow. They're pretty hard. They're one of the harder ones to grow, but they are able to do it commercially fairly successfully. So at least there is that. You can purchase them, but they are very expensive per pound. You can buy the inoculum, so why not try and see? So if you have a nice prolonged spring or fall, that would be when you would want to see if you can get them. Chanterelle mushrooms, again, these are almost impossible to grow in a household situation. You can grow them commercially, but they're so hard that you have to be what I would consider an expert to do that. Not stopping you from trying, but they don't really exist in a kit because they're so hard to grow. But there are some you can purchase the inoculum on like Etsy and some other places. So you can give it a try if this is something that you want to try. Functional, medicinal, and functional. So turkey tail, I'm going to make a note here that when you purchase a that coffee that you see in the Rise, I think is one of the brands, and there's some others. The turkey tail, it's a combination of a bunch of these. So it's supposed to be like a healthy coffee for you. It's ground up mushrooms mixed with coffee. So turkey tail mushrooms, that's going to be for immune support, antioxidants, and that kind of thing. Lion's mane, and you can see all of them here come in a kit, and that's going to be for cognitive enhancement, mood support, things like that. Cordyceps, Hey, if you are a fan of The Last of Us, the video game, or the TV show, it is not quite the same. It is a cordyceps fungus, and you can see it does have a similar growth. This is the one that kind of takes over the insects' brains and they become zombie insects. I did parasites um, webinar about a year ago, and cordyceps featured in there because I had just watched The Last of Us, which is about the cordyceps fungus basically taking over the world, and it turns people into zombies. Good show, good TV show, also a good video game. But cordyceps is kind of hard to grow. It grows in brown rice and yeast extract, which is different. So, but it is known for energy, respiratory health, immune, libido, and fertility. So, you know, worth trying if that's something you're interested in. Reishi, that's immune support, stress reduction. And then the subspecies antler reishi, it's the same thing, it's just a subspecies, has that kind of dramatic reindeer-like look to it, or coral, like staghorn coral. It looks a little bit like that. But these are all really challenging to grow, so not easy like some of the others. Okay, equipment needed. So, a mushroom growing equipment, mushroom spawn or spores, some kind of a light source, either a sunny window, indirect light, chip. Uh, if you're touching the screen, I'm not sure how you've done that. Please stop. Thank you. A substrate. So you're gonna, whatever your particular mushroom species needs, then you're going to have to get that if you're not getting a kit. And that could be the sawdust or hardwood, straw, that kind of stuff. Some type of a thermometer because you want to keep track of the soil temperature. You're trying to keep it in that narrow range that produces those pins or those fruiting bodies. A hygrometer, that's going to check the humidity. So if you have one for your outside, you can bring it inside to check that. Spray bottle for misting, growing containers that can be bags or trays, tubs or logs. If you're going to get fancy, you can do an air exchange system. So if you have a big grow out bag, then you can do filter that to the outside to have negative air pressure. A humidity control system, I mean, it can be as simple as the spray bottle or as complex as a humidity tent or greenhouse. And then a heat mat if you're in a colder climate. And that would be the same as what you would use for starting seeds to keep a nice even temperature. A pressure cooker or a large pot or even an autoclave, you can purchase them on Amazon. They do have small ones to sterilize equipment and substrate, and then a sharp knife or scissors, and that's going to be for harvesting. So optional equipment, that pressure cooker, you can use an Instant Pot because it gets it up to about 250 degrees for a period of time, and that sterilizes. So you can use a pressure cooker, like if you can use that. You can use an Instant Pot, or you can just purchase an autoclave. Those are 3 to 500 for a smaller one. A still air box, you see those, 35 bucks, and it helps prevent any weird spores. So if you do a lot of different varieties of mushrooms, you don't want those cross contaminating. So this helps prevent that from happening because it's in an enclosed area. You can make one of these. You can just get a plastic tub, cut some holes in it, put some rubber gloves in there. You can, I mean, yeah, you can make it yourself. Grow tent or greenhouse, you see those, you can buy those on Amazon. They're not very expensive. And if you have a spare room and you want to keep the humidity at a certain level, it's an easy way to do it because you can set all of that and then it'll vent outside, and then labels and logs, things like that. Okay, mushrooms to grow. Again, I'm not going to go into this too much. I did mention I was going to show you what the mushroom, the plug spawn looks like, and that's what you see up there. They're taking those wood dowels and rolling it around in that mushroom spawn, and then they're going to tap those into that wood log. Substrate, that's going to be the stuff like you see there in that shiitake bag, and then other supplements. If you need to, you can put gypsum, other manure, bran. Some of them prefer to grow on different substrates. Um, Light and humidity, you need to know if you're going to get really into it, you need to know what that particular species of mushroom wants or needs. And they're not all the same. So you need to learn for that particular species of mushroom, the temperature and the humidity and all of that stuff. I've, excuse me, mentioned a couple times sterilization. That is important because you don't want cross contamination of different species. So pasteurizing, that's boiling that substrate like sawdust for 1 to 2 hours to kill everything that's in it. And or sterilizing, you can use that pressure cooker, instant pot, or an autoclave if you want to get one of those. Fermenting, where you take that bag of straw, get it wet and keep it submerged in basically an anaerobic condition where there's no oxygen, and that will help uh, eliminate some of those competing small microorganisms. Or you can raise the pH, and that'll get rid of some of the mold and other bacteria. So best practices, obviously, keep it clean and sterilized. You don't want cross-contamination. That's a biggie. Nothing makes you madder than you're trying to grow a particular type of mushroom and you get something else that contaminates and gets in there. And that's what's growing. And you won't know for like, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before it starts growing. Um, Good air circulation and harvest them fairly early. You don't want them to get too old. Like me, I missed out on a harvest because I didn't happen to walk by the log and notice it was fruiting and it was ready to be harvested. Once they get hard, you don't want to eat them. Try not to overwater, keep it moist. Don't pull the mushrooms from the substrate, that disrupts the mycelial network. Snip them or use a knife to cut them. And the spring is the best time, or fall, but typically spring, if we have a prolonged spring. You don't, if you're out there and you're foraging, or even if you have an area outside, you don't want to take more than about 75% of those mushrooms. Store them in a paper bag with a paper towel to absorb moisture, and they'll keep for a while. All right, overview. We're going to kind of whiz through this. So first up, choose your mushroom spore collection or purchase. So here's where you're going to buy your spawn bags with either the inoculum in there, the kit if you want it, or just, you're going to get whatever it needs. So those 5 grain spawn bags, there's, the different types of grains. You're going to get the liquid culture. There's an example right there. Or that grain spawn from a trusted supplier because you don't want something else growing. But start with grain spawn if you're just starting out, it's easier. Germination on a nutrient media. You got to get that mycelial network growing first. So you got to inoculate this bag of sawdust or straw or whatever first. So you get your spores from whatever source you're doing and introduce them to that sterile nutrient media. So you can get petri dishes, that's in the top right. You could get, if you have that liquid culture, what you're trying to do is expand the amount that you have so that when you go to inoculate your substrate, you have a bigger bag of it. And then you can go and, you started out with a little bit, and now you're getting a lot, right? So this is where you're growing it in the nice warm area. Mycelial development. So you see up there, there's a plastic box and it's got straw in it. All that white fuzzy stuff is that mycelial network. So if you waited another couple weeks, that would start to fruit. But we're using that as what we're going to inoculate. So you're taking a little bit of that and then you're going to put it in a big area and you're going to get a bunch. So that mycelial development, you can see down there, you've got some little pins. You can see the different stages that it goes through. And then the network or the roots, if you want to call them that, below. Substrate preparation, I've mentioned sterilizing a couple times to prevent cross-contamination. So you can, this is an autoclave. Again, if you want to do this for reals and you really get into it, you can get one for about $350. It's not that expensive. But substrate preparation, inoculation, choose your mushroom type, figure out what type of substrate you need. Make sure that substrate is clean and sterilized so that you don't have anything else in there. And then you're going to mix all that inoculum, so that box of little mycelial network growing there. You're going to take a little bit of that and you're going to mix it into the container with the sterilized substrate. And that's going to take, so you see, you're growing. You're getting more and more. Then you're going to monitor. So this is just the wait and see part. So you're going to keep that container in a warm, dark place, and you're going to notice it colonizes. After about 3 weeks, 1 to 3 weeks, depending on temperatures and humidity and all of that, and the conditions needed by that particular species, you might start seeing those little pins. And so, like for instance, there's the jar or the grains, and you can see they're nicely coated with that fuzzy stuff. And then that means that if the whole jar or the whole box, that means that it's all covered. And then you're finally your fruiting body formation. And you can see the different stages there. And then harvest. And then that's where you take your knife and you start going in there and getting your harvest. So, yay, you've made it that far. All right, troubleshooting. So, contamination. You might have some bacteria, mold, or other things growing on there. That means you didn't sterilize it well enough. Green or black mold, again, poor circulation, get it out of there. You didn't sterilize it well enough. Sour smell, bacterial contamination. Overwatering. No pin formation after 3 weeks, probably too warm. It's not the right temperature. Reduce the temperature and see if you get more growth and increase that air circulation. Fungus gnats, we have a big problem with those in the office. They're going to feed on fungi, so that's not good. And you can use those little sticky traps to kill them. Also try BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, and that's a good way to kill them also. But that's a battle in itself. And then harvesting too late, that means you missed it and now they're hard. And, I don't know, maybe you can use them on garden art. All right, did you know? What do you do with the finished substrate? Well, throw it in your compost pile. You can certainly do that. How long does it take from start to harvest? Well, it could take anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months to a year or longer. So, whatever you choose, whatever species you choose, make sure you are aware of how long it takes and the level of difficulty of cultivating that. Can you take store-bought mushrooms and make new ones? Yes, you can. Break the stems and ends of them, like a portobello or an oyster mushroom, into small pieces and then just plant them in a sterile substrate, and that mycelial network will continue to grow, and that'll inoculate the new spawn. Okay, so I know some people are probably thinking, well, what if I want to go out and forage? Okay, well, we'll whiz through this, but I'm not telling you how to forage. And I do have to put a disclaimer in here because that's something that I think that experts should really be the ones that are doing it. So you need to do a lot of research before. So how to tell the bad ones from the good ones: cap shape, color, texture, gill attachment, bruising reaction when you touch it, bruising reaction, and grow conditions. So these are the things that an expert forager will know and how to tell. And so you can see here, like I said, I'm not really going to go through this, but these are some of the things that you would be concerned with if you picked something. You're like, is this a good one or not? Cross-check this, and then, and I'll show you in a second, you really want to positively identify anything that you think about eating. As I put on there, you can always eat a mushroom once, but you may never eat it again because you'll be dead. So it's not something to be really messing with if you're not an expert. So don't rely on one trait, a color, a smell, the habitat. Make sure that you're cross-checking with multiples. Don't forage alone. Bring somebody along and learn from them. Don't eat wild raw mushrooms unless they're verified by multiple sources. And if you're in doubt, throw it out. Don't eat it if you don't know for 100%. So these are some lookalikes. Death Cap, Deadly Gallerina, and the False Chanterelle. Again, I'm going to whiz through these. If you're foraging, you better know the difference between these. This is a false chanterelle and a chanterelle. Again, not something that you want to mess with. Here's where I wanted to point out, if you want to try that, go lurk. These are all Facebook pages. Go lurk in these Facebook pages. You will learn so much about mushrooms, for wild foraging and mushrooms. You will learn a lot. And don't feel like if you think you might have something, take a picture of it, post it there, and the experts will, no judgment, tell you what it is. And I see people that are posting all the time, hey, I found this. I think it's a lion's mane. Can you confirm? And they will confirm or say, no, that's not, that kind of thing. If somebody eats a wild mushroom and you're concerned it's toxic, you can also post in some of these. There are some other pages also, and they will tell you, uh, for poison control, what you need to do. So, and again, this is being recorded. It will be on our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and you can also request the slide deck. So that's basically it. I only went one over. So let's see if we have any questions. If you want this particular slide deck, please write down my email address that you see here, lisa.klein@gwinnettcounty.com, and email me, because that's the easiest way to do it. I get a lot of different emails and I try to respond to what I see in my email inbox. So that is the best way to do it. Don't put your email address into um, to the chat box. I'm not going to be able to go through anywhere. So, all right, let's see if there's any questions. Um, when you mentioned sterilizing compost, how is that done? It's done the same way that you would do sterilization of hardwood wood chips or sawdust that they use. That's actually probably the most common way that they have a substrate for that inoculum to grow on, is it's sterilized sawdust. And it's done the same way. You either put it in an autoclave, you put it in a pressure cooker, you put it in a instant pot. You can boil it for a couple of hours. So you're probably not going to boil your compost, but putting it into a pressure cooker or an autoclave or an instant pot, you can do that. Obviously, as a homeowner, you can't do it on large quantities of it like they do for commercial, but you can certainly do smaller batches if that's something that you want to do. Now, a lot of people just purchase their own, and they buy it from somebody who does it, and it comes pre-sterilized, so you don't have to really worry about it. You just buy your bag of sterilized sawdust, and you buy your bag of inoculated your inoculum for, say, shiitake, and then you just get your clean box and you put it in there in your little shoebox substrate and inoculate it, and then put the lid on it, stick it in it, and grow it that way. That would be the next step after you were comfortable after growing a mushroom kit or two or three. After you're confident enough from growing a mushroom kit, then you can try getting and doing your own. I definitely recommend reading a lot so that you are comfortable. I have that step-by-step growing. There's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of YouTube videos out there on exactly how to follow step-by-step. This was not meant to be that. It was only meant to be kind of an overview of the whole process so that everybody would be comfortable kind of knowing a little bit about the whole process from start to finish. And then if that's something that you're like, it's pretty cool, I think I want to try that. Then you would naturally do the first step, which would probably be getting a mushroom kit. And again, there are some that are super easy, like the crimini mushrooms, the buttons, the oyster mushrooms, super easy. And you can buy those kits online, very easy to come by. You can find them sometimes around the holidays. They make good Christmas presents. And then if you have success there and you like it, then you might take it to the next step. You could buy the bag of inoculum. That'll give you more because you got to cook with them too. I mean, sometimes people don't make them, but every once in a while. But maybe if, you know, you're vegan or vegetarian and you want something that's like that meaty texture and you're doing it for your health, that would be a good one. You could definitely, you know, incorporate that into your diet. Maybe you want to sell some at a farmer's market, so you want to scale it up a little bit. You're going to get the buckets and you're going to start growing more and you're going to have a dedicated little greenhouse where you have a heater, that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's definitely customizable. You can do it however you would like to do it, with whatever species or multiple species. There are a lot of people that'll sell them at farmers markets and things like that. So they were doing that out at UGA at their farmers market since they had the logs out there. They would go harvest them and go sell them every week. So you can totally do that. Well, if nobody has any other questions for me, hopefully you enjoyed this and learned a little bit of interesting trivia about mushrooms and how to grow them. And again, if you want the slide deck, please email me at the lisa.klein@gwinnettcounty.com that you see there. And I will be happy to send you the slide deck, or you can go to the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and this should be up probably next week sometime. And that's basically it. So thank you all for coming, and I appreciate you all, and hopefully you will be here next time. Bye bye.